Mr. Holt, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Knoll.
Here.
Ms. Knoll represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Rose.
Here.
Mr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Ms. Leverins.
Here.
Leverins is an at-large member and is this year's vice chair. Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District. Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Mr. Croft.
Here.
Mr. Croft represents the Powhatan District and is this year's chair. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development and Planning for the county. And sitting to my virtual left is Mr. Max Salavin, our Deputy County Attorney. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. And as everybody knows, this is a virtual meeting, and there's a resolution in our packet with lots of whereases. And instead of reading the actual resolution, I'll just summarize it before asking for a motion. On April 14th, 2020, the board readopted the Continuity of Government Ordinance, which under certain circumstances permits this commission to conduct today's meeting by electronic or telephonic means without a quorum of members physically present. May I have a motion to approve that resolution for this evening's meeting?
Haldeman moves approval.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. Would you call the roll?
Ms. Knoll.
Yay. Aye.
Mr. Rose.
Aye.
Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Ms. Leverins.
Aye.
And Mr. Croft.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. And just a reminder as we go through the virtual meeting that where possible, we'll use the raised hand icon, but I know that I, for one, am guilty of sometimes forgetting about that. We now move to reports of the commission. Mr. Haldeman, anything from the Development Review Committee?
Oh dear, I forgot all about that. I'm sorry.
Mr. Croft, could I pause everybody for that? We need our public comment period.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
right.
okay.
Okay, yeah, we'll move to public comment period. And this is for items not subject to a public hearing tonight. I'll open the public comment period. Mr. Holt, were there any cards submitted?
No, sir, we did not get anything for tonight.
Okay, thank you. I'll close the public comment period and now move to the reports of the commission.
Mr. Croft, it's Jack Haldeman again. I'm reminded that we did not meet this month, so that's why.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just figured I would just ask in case there were any side issues to report, but thank you, Jack. Mm-hmm. Mr. Polster, Policy Committee.
Policy Committee met at 4 p.m. on 14 May 2020. The committee members present were Rich Kraft, Tim O'Connor, Rob Rose, and Frank Polster. Staff members present were Terry Costello, Deputy Zoning Administrator, John Riesinger, Planner, Ellen Cook, Senior Planner, Max Halavin, Deputy County Attorney, Christy Parrish, Zoning Administrator, and Mr. Garvin from the Williamsburg area Beekeepers. He's the president. Ordinance 190010, zoning ordinance amendments to address the keeping of bees in residential districts, phase 3. Ms. Costello presented a proposed draft ordinance that permits beekeeping in the R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, planned unit development residential, PUDR, and mixed use districts with no restrictions as far as it is an accessory use or primary use. Ms. Parrish and Mr. Halavin on Section F of the draft ordinance, which required written notification of the intent to keep bees to abutting properties, was unenforceable and recommended removal of Section F. Committee members concurred with their recommendation. Ms. Costello noted that the Board of Supervisors initiating resolution addressed beekeeping only in residential and agricultural districts. If the Planning Commission wished to extend beekeeping to the entire county, then the Board of Supervisors would have to revise its initiating resolution. In the discussion of the issue, Mr. Garvin noted that the meadery at the City of Williamsburg was maintaining a beehive on their commercial property. Members agreed to recommend to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors extend beekeeping to the entire county. Ms. Parrish clarified a question on beekeeping on public lands and stated that it was permitted use. Mr. Garvin was very interested to know what the process is and plans to follow up with the staff. On a 4-0 vote, committee members voted to recommend approval of Ordinance 19-0010 zoning ordinance amendments to address the keeping of bees in residential districts to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors, with the deletion of Section F in the draft ordinance and a recommendation that the Board of Supervisors consider a revision to its initiating resolution to include the entire county. Item number 2 on the agenda was Ordinance 19-0005, consideration of amendments to the zoning ordinance to address combat tactical training facilities, Phase 3. Mr. Riesinger presented a proposal zoning ordinance amendments to address combat tactical training facilities for the committee's consideration. On a 4-0 vote, committee members voted to recommend the approval of Ord 19-005, consideration of amendments to the zoning ordinance to address combat tactical training facilities and planning commissions and report of supervisors. And that concludes my report. If there's any questions, if not, we have this last item on our agenda tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Polster. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Thank you very much. We'll now move to the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are generally deemed to be non-controversial. However, a planning commissioner can pull an item for discussion. Tonight, we have one item on the consent agenda. They're the meeting minutes from our May 6, 2020 regular meeting. Would anyone like to pull that, or may I have a motion for approval?
Haldeman moves to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you. We have 2 public hearings tonight. The first one is ORD-19-0005, consideration of amendments to the zoning ordinance to address combat tactical training facilities. Good evening, Mr. Reisinger.
Good evening to the Commission. On August 13th, 2019, the Board of Supervisors adopted an initiating resolution directing staff to explore amending the zoning ordinance to define combat tactical training facilities excluded as a permitted use in agricultural and residential zoning districts, and to evaluate its appropriateness in the M2 General Industrial District. Accordingly, staff analyzed development proposals from other localities as well as the county's zoning ordinance. Staff determined that a definition could be created for combat tactical training facilities without listing it in any use list. Since the zoning ordinance is exclusionary in nature, combat tactical training facilities would not be allowed in any zoning district where the use is not listed as a permitted or especially permitted use. Staff also evaluated the appropriateness of including combat tactical training facilities as a specially permitted use in the M2 district. The primary purpose of the M2 district is to establish an area where the principal use of land is for industrial operations, which are not compatible with residential or commercial service establishments. Staff determined that combat tactical training facilities would not fulfill the intent of the M2 district since it is not an industrial use. Staff proposes creating a definition for combat tactical training facilities within Section 24-2 definitions and not including it as a permitted or especially permitted use within any zoning district. During a series of policy committee meetings, staff presented a draft ordinance for review. At its May 14th meeting, the policy committee unanimously recommended approval of the draft ordinance to the Planning Commission. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the draft ordinance to the Board of Supervisors. I am happy to answer any questions you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reisinger. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. Mr. Holt, were there any cards or notices submitted?
No, sir, we did not receive any for this case tonight.
All right, I'll close the public hearing and turn to the Planning Commission for a discussion or a motion.
This is Jack Haldeman. I went through the use of the intentions of all the zoning districts, and I couldn't find any of them where this was consistent with the intent of any of the zoning uses. I'm also very appreciative of the new definition of combat tactical training. I think staff nailed it. And so those are my only two comments.
Thank you. Anybody else? May I have a motion?
This is Julie Leverance. I'd like to move approval of ORD 19-005, consideration of amendments to the zoning ordinance to address combat tactical training facilities.
Thank you. Mr. Holt?
Ms. Knoll,
Aye.
Mr. Rose,
Aye.
Mr. Polster,
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Ms. Leverance,
Aye.
and Mr. Croft.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Our next case is ORD-20-0008, proposed ordinance and policy amendments to address Code of Virginia changes regarding wireless communication facilities. Good evening, Mr. Leininger.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. In 2017 and 2018, the General Assembly passed legislation requiring changes to how local zoning ordinances may treat applications for wireless communications facilities. Those state code changes, combined with the recent Federal Communications Commission decisions, are intended to support the deployment of 5G technology. During a series of policy committee meetings, staff presented the draft zoning ordinance language to the following sections: definitions, Division 6 communication facilities, each district use list, and the policy for performance standards for communication facilities, antennas, towers, and support structures that require special use permits. Staff proposed a series of updates to the sections, including additional definitions based on state and federal changes, overall changes to Division 6 to ensure the county complies with state and FCC regulations, and amendments to the use list for each zoning district to ensure that the use list did not conflict with Division 6. Additionally, staff proposed changes to the policy titled Performance Standards for Communications Facilities and Antennas, Towers, and Support Structures that require a special use permit. The amendments to the policy include removing text that is covered by the zoning ordinance and removing text that is prohibited by state code. Prior to the final policy committee meeting, the county's legal consultant reviewed the draft ordinance and definition changes for consistency with the Virginia State Code and FCC regulations. That review produced additional minor edits clarifying the timelines for the application reviews in Section 24-128C and added additional definitions. At its December 4, 2019 meeting, the Planning Commission adopted the initiating resolution by a vote of 6-0. At the February 13, 2020 Policy Committee meeting, the committee voted to recommend approval of the draft ordinance changes for wireless communications to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors by a vote of 3-0. Staff recommends the Planning Commission recommend approval of the draft zoning ordinance language for wireless communication facilities to the Board of Supervisors. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Leininger. Any questions for staff? Okay, thank you. Mr. Holt, let me open the public hearing. And Mr. Holt, were any cards or comments submitted?
No, sir, not for this item.
Okay, thank you. I'll close the public hearing and turn to the commission for discussion or a motion.
This is Jack Haldeman. I just, I'm sorry to lose Section A of the performance standards, the part that was all struck. I thought that was a very rational and useful part of the standards, but I know we don't have a choice, so it's too bad.
Thank you, Jack. Any other comments?
Yeah, this is Julia Leverance, and I just want to commend staff on how they tackled this very complicated revision to our ordinances.
Great point. There's a lot of work that went into that, and this is a very complex obviously issue that has been a moving target for quite a while. Thank you, Julie. Anybody else? Or may I have a motion?
This is Julie Leverins. I'd like to move that we approve the draft of ORD-20-0008, proposed ordinance and policy amendments to address Code of Virginia changes regarding wireless communication facilities.
Thank you. Mr. Holt, would you call the roll, please?
Would Mr. Chairman, for clarity for the minutes and for the information that was included in your agenda packets, Ms. Leverins, does your motion also include the proposed recommended changes to the performance standards? I know you had mentioned specifically the ordinance text changes. I wanted to make sure if that was in there as well. That would be helpful information for the board.
Yes, it absolutely does. Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion to recommend approval. Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. Rose?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
No.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Ms. Leverins?
Aye.
And Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is Planning Commission considerations, which there's nothing listed for this evening. And then we move into the Planning Director's report. Mr. Holt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I don't have anything additional other than what's been provided and included in your agenda packets tonight, but if you had any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to help with those.
Any questions for Mr. Holt? Okay, thank you. Planning Commission discussion and requests. The only item that I have is just to mention that the Board of Supervisor coverage for the June 9th meeting is myself, so I will be there in person. And does anyone else have any item?
Rich, I thought you did a great job of representing the commission at the last Board of Supervisors work session. You covered everything very well on it. I just appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jack. Yeah. And everyone has seen Tammy's email today showing that our next PC working group meeting is Monday, July 13th. July 13th. She had to recall the 15th is actually a Wednesday, and so it's going to be July 13th, a Monday.
Yeah, this is Frank. I not so much a comment or discussion point, but with that upcoming PCWG meeting, I'm hoping that we're going to still have a follow-on with those excellent notes that Tammy put together from our 6 May meeting, with the expectation that there's either something going on before that meeting or we're going to have something to follow on those discussions. Am I incorrect in assuming that, Mr. Holt?
You're not incorrect. I don't know if we're going to touch on all of them. So staff is busy behind the scenes. We're going through all of those. And to complement that, obviously we had gotten some requests in and some observations and requests for more information, all that. Also from the board members as part of the work session. And remember, we still had some from some of the earlier group input to the CPT. So staff has created sort of a gigantic matrix, and we are developing follow-on plans on how staff will address each of those. You know, some of the items I think are pretty straightforward in that there's a lot of text in the current comp plan that we can continue to bring forward, and we'll work with the PC working group to update as may be needed. There are some that are straightforward. You know, obviously some of the other ones that are multifaceted, like some of the environmental protections, living shores, flooding, some of those, I think we're based on available resources, figuring the best way that we can connect back up to the PC. And I do think some of those are going to need and would benefit from those follow-on discussions. So So, rest assured staff will get to all of those. And yes, there'll be a whole lot more information we'll be sharing with you all as we move further along.
Thank you for the update.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Oh, all right. In that case, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Alderman moves.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Thank you.